Hello, my name is Travis. You can call me Trav if you'd like. There's going to be about a 2 or 3 minute intro. If you want to skip ahead, go ahead. But I do want to I have an intro. I want to say something real fast, a few things. First thing is this. I am sick right now, so forgive me if I'm a little spacey or I seem off. But I did tell somebody who I believe is a subscriber of mine that I would get this video out. So I've been working on it. Now the next thing is this. People have asked, well, in the comments, I made a short about this subject here, why it's so hard for people to admit they're wrong. And a common theme kept popping up in my comment section, which was, how can this fit into a family dynamic? And I found that really ironic and interesting, because that's actually why I started to look into this. Was a situation that happened between me and another family member. That's how I learn in life. It's how I learned, not just about the other person, but I learn a lot about myself as well. I like to learn. I'm a nerd, dude. It's just what I do. I love to fill my head full of things. So anyway, so I'm going to include that. It's not just going to be about why people have a hard time admitting they're wrong. It's going to also include the other person's perspective, and it's also going to include the family dynamic, okay? Now, another thing is, people have asked me, what do I use on these videos? And it's just my notepad. That's it. Just my notepad on my phone. I take all these notes. I find credible sources online, or I have gotten some of it through some of the books that are in this house. And I just share what I learn. I don't like to often input my personal experiences into this channel specifically, but I think I will more now, just because it's my channel. I can do whatever I want. If you don't like it, you don't have to watch, kind of thing, So one last thing before we dive in. If you're not familiar with psychology, a lot of the same terminology is used in psychology. Sometimes they'll have different names even too, but for instance, like tribalism, that could go into politics very well. It's tribalism, you're on the left or the right, for instance. So that's your tribe. You pick it, and then you become tribal and all that. But it can also go all the way down to something as petty as iPhone or Android. Which one's better? Or which one's better with Xbox or PlayStation? That's still tribalism, but how tribalism would fit into that is different. So if you hear me use the same terminology, same kind of verbiage, it is the same type of thing. It's just it fits into each example differently. So without further ado, I'm going to start. So the first thing I have here, and I'm going to shorten this because it made the video very long whenever I try to do the full script that I had here. So I'm going to shorten this, but I will read the full version of this. And this is because I feel like it's the cornerstone of what starts the whole freaking domino effect in our minds of why it's so hard to admit we're wrong, and it's cognitive dissonance. So cognitive dissonance is the psychological discomfort we experience when two things we believe don't fit together. For example, imagine someone who genuinely believes they're a good, fair, reasonable person. Then they do something that hurts someone else. And now they have two conflicting ideas. One is, I'm a good person, and then the other is, I did something that wasn't very good. Those two things don't fit comfortably together, and one way the brain can reduce that discomfort is by changing the way we interpret what happened. Instead of thinking maybe I was wrong, the person might start thinking, well, I only did that because they made me angry, or it wasn't really that bad, or they misunderstood me. That you can come up with a lot. Sometimes that happens without the person consciously deciding to lie or manipulate anybody. Their mind is trying to get those conflicting pieces to fit. But think about what it's like for the person on the other side of the conversation. You may be trying to talk about something that genuinely hurt you, but instead of getting acknowledgement, you're getting an explanation for why their behavior was justified. And after enough of those conversations, you can start feeling like you're not even discussing the original problem anymore. You're arguing about whether the problem was ever a problem in the first place. This can become especially complicated within a family because families have years of history together. If someone repeatedly experiences discomfort whenever they're confronted about something, the family can eventually learn that certain subjects are almost impossible to discuss. People might stop bringing up things. They might keep their feelings to themselves. They might decide that it's easier to keep the peace than try to resolve the problem. And now the problem hasn't disappeared, it's just gone underground. Okay? Now, I think that sums it up pretty well with cognitive dissonance in this specific scenario, right? But as I was reading through this, I started to also not only learn a lot about the situation I was talking about with my family member, but I was really I just always go back to also relationships, like romantic relationships that I've been in, because, you know, the last serious one I was in, I had a child with this person, and it literally ruined my life. And so it's hard, you know, I have literal trauma from that. And I'm not trying to get too personal here, but I literally had to like go to therapy and everything to rewire my brain back to normal, because she got my head so screwed up. I mean, it's insane. So it's hard to like overlook some of the similarities in these situations. So I think if you're somebody who also is just watching this, who's maybe not watching it about family, then you can think about this in numerous ways yourself. The second one is our defense mechanisms and how we have them. So a few examples of that is we might minimize it, or we might rationalize why we did it. We might shift the blame. We might focus on something the other person did instead. Dude, that is hard to take when somebody does that. When somebody flips something on you and you're like, or they're minimizing how you feel or whatever. But the interesting thing is that the emotion underneath all of that isn't necessarily anger all the time. Sometimes it's shame, embarrassment, guilt, fear, or being seen as a bad person. That's a huge thing, because as I was looking through this, I started seeing that like there's a huge social aspect that goes along with this as well. So like, for instance, if somebody would admit they're wrong to you in private, if there's even one other person there that they care about, like what that person thinks, it makes it a lot harder for them to admit they're wrong. It gets harder and harder the more people that are around, but it can take just one other person, and it makes it like very hard for them to mentally be like, I'm sorry about anything. Even to acknowledge your side. So like, say they've talked to that person beforehand, which happened in my situation. They had already talked about it. He had already got his points out, and he had already been, told that, yeah, you're right on this. So I stood no chance at even being heard at all, and I did end up getting ganged up on. So it was like I think that's something you need to understand, was like there's a social aspect to that as well, like to this whole thing. So the person isn't necessarily thinking, how can I avoid accountability though? Their brain may simply be reacting to something that feels psychologically threatening. But again, think about what this does to the person they're talking to. So imagine you're telling someone, when you did this, it hurt me. And they respond with, well, you did this. Now you're no longer talking about your experience. You're defending yourself. And eventually you can start feeling like you have to build a case just to prove that your feelings are legitimate. Within a family, this can create something that a lot of people probably recognize: walking on eggshells. You learn which subjects are safe. You learn which subjects aren't. You learn how certain people react when they're confronted, and eventually you might start changing your behavior just to avoid the reaction. That's a really important distinction, because now the problem isn't just that the person's inability to tolerate being wrong. It's that when an individual psychological pattern can become a family dynamic. Okay. This next one is one of my favorite things to come across in psychology. It's because it just blows my mind that we're like this. I mean, a lot of this blows my mind, but this one always blows my mind in every scenario. It's called naive realism. And it doesn't require somebody to be intentionally dishonest. Naive realism is the tendency to believe that we see reality objectively. In other words, we tend to think, I'm seeing the situation the way it actually is, right? And when someone disagrees with us, it's easy to assume that they're the one who is being biased, emotional, irrational, or simply doesn't understand what's happening. And the person experiencing this may genuinely believe they're being objective. That's what makes it so difficult. They aren't necessarily thinking, I'm refusing to listen to you. They may actually be thinking, I'm listening to you, but you're simply wrong. And this can make disagreements incredibly difficult, because now you're not just disagreeing about an opinion, you're disagreeing about whose perception of reality is accurate. Man, that's crazy. Now, for the person on the receiving end, this can become exhausting, because you may feel like your perspective isn't being recognized as a legitimate perspective. And families can really struggle with this. You have two family members remember the same event completely differently. One person says, that's not what happened. The other person says, yes, it is. And eventually, the original event almost becomes irrelevant. Now the argument isn't about whose version of reality gets accepted. And when this happens, now the argument is about whose version of reality gets accepted. It changes the whole dynamic of it. And when this happens repeatedly, people can start feeling like they aren't just disagreed with. They're being told their own experiences aren't valid. That can create a lot of resentment over time. Now, from this point forward, I'm going to give you a shorter summed up version, or else this video will be insanely long. There's only 2 more before I hit the final point in this video, but I don't want it to get crazy long, and I don't want to bore you. Leave me comments and give me feedback on how much you're willing to put up with me on here, and I'll make them as long as you want. It's just I don't want to bore people. So this one's called self-serving bias. And it's our tendency to interpret situations in ways that protect our own self-image. This plays into what I was talking about earlier when I was talking about how when there's more people around, it's very hard for a person. It makes it even harder for a person to admit when they're wrong. So, for instance, when we succeed, we give ourselves credit. When we don't, we tend to blame it on other things. Like, this person got in the way of this, or like, this stupid thing, this stupid light I'm trying to hang isn't working, and it's this stupid screw. They must have messed it up when they did it, and you can make all kinds of excuses. But the problem isn't that occurs. The problem is it can become a pattern, okay? And then when a consistent pattern. So then when it becomes a pattern, you can end up with situations, where someone's mistakes always have an explanation, but everyone else's mistakes have consequences. That line right there is what made me think about my ex, my daughter's mother, is she always had an explanation for anything she did wrong, but every little thing I had that she could hold against me had severe consequences, okay? They might say, I only reacted that way because you pushed me. And when you react to them, suddenly your reaction is the problem. I mean, come on, dude. Is this not the most frustrating thing to experience in somebody's life? So the way this can fit into a family is families can have roles, right? Like, this person's the problem child. This person's the successful one. This person's the peacekeeper. We have labels in families. And when that happens, those established roles can become so established that people start treating each other like that role instead of like that person, if that makes any sense. So like, maybe somebody's changed, but the family still treats them like the person they used to be, and that can keep old conflicts alive for years. And that's crazy. Now, this also plays into this next point here, plays into something that I think is very interesting with going along with the theme I keep talking about how whenever there's more people around, it's called threatened self-image. So, threatened self-image. There's a huge psychological difference between saying I did something wrong and believing because I did something wrong, I must be a bad person. If someone has trouble separating their behavior from their identity, admitting they're wrong can feel like an attack on who they are. So instead of hearing, "that thing you did hurt me," they hear, "you're a terrible person." And now they're defending their character instead of discussing their behavior. You might say, "I just want you to understand why that hurt me," and they respond, "So you think I'm a horrible person?" And suddenly the entire conversation has changed. You're no longer talking about what happened, you're reassuring them that they're not a bad person. Now this can be really frustrating for the person on the other end, because you're just asking them to take responsibility for one specific thing, but within a family this can have a huge effect. If every criticism of someone's behavior turns into a threat to their identity, eventually family members may stop giving criticism altogether, which is what happened. This all just connects into my ex so much. This is how nobody would confront her mom on anything. They just let her run rampant. It was crazy because of this. And it's crazy because it opens my eyes to everything. So eventually family members may stop giving criticism altogether. They may think, "What's the point? It's just going to turn into an argument," so they stay quiet. And the person who struggles with accountability may interpret that silence as everything being okay, but it isn't necessarily okay. The resentment may simply be building underneath the surface. So I have one final segment, and that is how these 5 things can connect. But before that, I want to say something here. It is really easy for me to get emotionally invested in the studies that I make on here. It's like kind of crazy, actually. And it always leads me to another video, usually. And that's why I already have another video recorded about the relationship side of this. Because it just hits me in a way that opens my eyes to so much. But it helps me, and that's what I'm hoping this is going to do for you guys, is help you, because this isn't just my opinion I'm giving. This is legitimately, you can look it up yourself. I go out of my way to make sure every bit of advice I'm going to give you here at the end, every bit of everything I say on here is backed by psychology, and it's backed correctly. I am not trying to just spit out my own. So yes, I can get emotionally involved very quickly and easily with some of this, but my advice is always thoroughly backed up by psychology, and if it's not, you can prove me wrong. I mean, I will say that with pure confidence. So this last segment here, how these 5 things can connect. This is where all of the 5 things can connect. They don't necessarily happen separately. They can feed into each other. Someone does something wrong, that creates discomfort. Cognitive dissonance kicks in. Their self-image feels threatened. Defense mechanisms help protect them from that discomfort. Their self-serving bias may help them explain why it wasn't really their fault, and naive realism can make them genuinely believe that their interpretation of the situation is the correct one. So now you have one person trying to protect themselves psychologically while the other person is trying to get them to acknowledge what happened. That can create a cycle. Something happens. Someone feels hurt, they bring it up, the other person becomes defensive, the first person pushes harder to be understood, the second person becomes even more defensive, the argument escalates, and eventually nobody feels heard. The original problem never gets resolved, and then it happens again and again, and eventually, what started as an individual psychological defense can become part of the entire family's way of communicating. Alright? I think this is powerful stuff. So I guess that was, I lied in a way, because that was not the last thing. The last thing was I wanted to give advice. I wanted to give advice to the people who may have a hard time admitting when you're wrong, and I wanted to give advice to the people who may be dealing with someone who has a hard time admitting when they're wrong. So I wrote this all out because I want to make it perfectly clear. So advice for the person dealing with this. This is going to be, the first part is for the person who may be dealing with the person who has a hard time admitting they're wrong, you know? So what can you actually do if you're dealing with someone who has a really hard time admitting they're wrong? First, understand that you can't force someone to develop self-awareness. You can explain what happened. You can explain how it affected you. You can set boundaries around how you're willing to communicate. But you cannot make another person admit something they are psychologically unwilling to admit. And sometimes continuing to argue doesn't create accountability, it just creates a bigger argument. So instead of making the goal, I need to make this person admit they're wrong, or I need you to admit you're wrong. Sometimes it's healthier to make the goal, I need to communicate what happened and decide what I'm willing to accept going forward. And understand, listen, this is the most important part of the entire video in my opinion. Understanding the psychology behind someone's behavior doesn't mean you have to excuse the behavior. You can understand why someone becomes defensive and still recognize that their behavior is hurting you. Those two things can exist at the same time. That's the most important part for the person who may be dealing with it. Now, the advice that, and all of this is backed by psychology. So the advice for the person who may be experiencing it, you might think to yourself, man, yeah, that's me. I have a hard time admitting I'm wrong. So this is advice for you backed up by psychology. If you're someone who recognizes yourself in this video, yourself in this video, there's something important to remember. Being wrong doesn't make you a bad person. That's super important because that is where it starts. Your defenses pop up at that point. Making a mistake doesn't erase everything good about you. Being corrected doesn't automatically mean someone is attacking you. And apologizing doesn't make you weak. Actually, being able to say, I was wrong, can be one of the strongest things you can do in a relationship from a psychological standpoint, honestly. Because when you can admit that you made a mistake, the other person doesn't have to fight you just to be heard. You don't have to defend your entire identity. You can simply acknowledge the behavior. Just say, I did that. I understand why it hurt you. I shouldn't have done that. And then you move forward and try not to do it again. Now, the whole point about that, and this is me closing now, is I want to give you everyone on any side of this equation. I want to give you knowledge. So, like for me, how I said, I learn a lot about myself in these videos. And like with doing these studies, it's not just the other person I'm learning about myself as well. And so I really want you to go forward with the knowledge that I just gave you, so that way it can help you in the same way it helps me. And everybody's different, but I just know it helped me. And I hope that there's others out there that it would help. So in ending, I want you to understand that moving forward, keep this in mind. So if you're dealing with someone who has a hard time admitting they're wrong, try to keep these things in mind, that this is what's happening on a psychological level. And so also what's happening to you on a psychological level while dealing with the person. So now you're aware of both sides of what's happening, and it can help you navigate it. It helps me anyway. And also, the same goes for the other side. If you're having a hard time admitting you're wrong, stop and try to think about this, because one of the hardest things we can do is go against our own psychology. It's so deeply ingrained into us. And a lot of people leave comments on there like, this is because of this evolutionary reason, right? Well, I would love to include stuff like that, but I don't want to single anybody out because not everybody believes in evolution, right? So like my whole goal on this channel is to bring everybody together, because what better to bring everybody together than something we all deal with, no matter what color you are, no matter where you're from, no matter what background you have, no matter anything. We all have, psychology applies even to psychologists, okay? So it's in us all. It's not like it's just this one group, okay? And I did a study on cults, and that was another thing I learned in that study, was like, dang, I thought this was some kind of distant group far away from me, that like just extra gullible. But after doing the study, I was like, dude, under the right circumstances, this might work on me. And that's terrifying. It's so weird how our minds work. It's just crazy. So I just want you to keep that in mind. I think this is the longest video I've done on this channel. Let me know. Do you like this setup? Do you like it better the way that I did it before? Give me feedback. I hope this gave you some knowledge. I hope this gives you some empowerment going forward. And I would love to hear what you have to say in the comment section below. If you're on YouTube, I'm starting to realize why people say like so much, because my God, dude, it helps so much. Like each like means more people see it, you get more subscribers, you grow the channel. These long form videos don't get a lot of attention. That's normal for these social media platforms. Your shorts get a lot more traction. But it takes a lot more work to do the long form. But I did tell the guy that I would do this for you, so I hope that you enjoyed it. So let me know with feedback. What do you guys think? I would love to hear your own experiences, anything you feel comfortable sharing. Let's come together. Let's try to learn, and let's try to understand each other better and also understand ourselves. I love you. Peace out.